World War I. Differing viewpoints. Some people view World War I as a family feud, since the royal families of Britain, Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Russia were all connected by either blood or by marriage. Others view the war as the fall of eagles, since by the end of the war, the German Empire, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and the Ottoman Empire all ceased to exist. Still others view the war as the war to end all wars, especially since this is an extremely destructive war that virtually obliterates an entire generation of men. And then you have those like Woodrow Wilson, who felt that this war was the war to make the world safe for democracy. Causes of the war. In 1914, Europe is an armed camp with an alliance system that divides Europe into two armed camps. On one side, you have the Triple Entente, made up of Britain, France, and Russia. On the other side, you had the Triple Alliance, made up by Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy. You should also note that Russia was the big brother or the protector of Serbia, and that Germany had ties to the Ottoman Empire, and Austria-Hungary had ties to Bulgaria. This is a political cartoon demonstrating the Triple Alliance. Italy is the short young man. The gentleman on the right would be Austria-Hungary, and you can tell that Germany is on the left due to the helmet. When the war begins, the Triple Entente transitions into the Allied powers. Britain, led by George V, France, led by President Poincaré, and Russia, led by Tsar Nicholas II. Italy will switch over to the Allied side in 1915 and is led by Victor Emmanuel II. For the Central Powers, which were the Triple Alliance, you had Wilhelm II of Germany, Franz Joseph of Austria-Hungary, and Enver Pasha of the Ottoman Empire also. So Europe was divided into two armed camps. The political cartoon seen here shows some of the causes of the war, with the Triple Alliance and the Triple Entente taking center stage on a bed of wood known as the Balkans, colonial rivalries, that's imperialism, fed by an arms race and nationalist movements. Militarism and an arms race was a very major cause of this war, along with the alliance system. Germany had been spending much money on increasing its navy and becoming a rival of Great Britain. The British did not appreciate this. In the political cartoon, you can see how everybody's kind of chiming in and adding to their armed forces. You have even Uncle Sam over to your top right saying the others are growing to beat the band, so obviously we need a larger navy. Even Japan, down towards the bottom, is getting involved in the actions of the arms race. Another cause are economic and imperial rivalries. Many nations claimed chunks out of Africa And we saw earlier how imperialism almost led the US to become involved in a war with Germany over Samoa. We stepped in Colombia to build the canal. We mediated a border dispute between Britain and Venezuela. Germany, in particular, was eager to get new colonies. They were a little bit late to the colonial scramble for Africa. And this led Germany almost into a war with France over Morocco. So imperial rivalries will be yet another cause of this war. Aggressive nationalism was a cause as well. In this political cartoon, you can see Russia off to the right, and Austria-Hungary is trying to hold off Russia with the help of Germany. Italy's just looking on, looking like an Italian guy in a boot. Spain, to the left, is just sitting and watching, as is Britain at the moment. But aggressive nationalism, the idea that your country had to be the best, was important. Another thing that goes along with this nationalism is the idea of ethnic minorities who wanted their own countries. We see this especially in the case of Austria-Hungary. Pan-Slavism made the Balkans known as the powder keg of Europe. Many of the nationalities in the Balkan area wanted to shake off the shackles of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Serbia, in particular, wanted to be the leader of a pan-Slavic Greater Serbia movement. Serbia looked to Russia to back her up. This political cartoon shows you Germany, Britain, France, Russia, and Austria-Hungary all sitting on a pot that's about to boil over called the Balkan problem. The spark. What starts the war is the assassination of the Austrian Archduke and heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, Franz Ferdinand, and his wife Sophie. Franz Ferdinand and Sophie had gone to Sarajevo to have a goodwill tour. They had gone to Sarajevo in Bosnia to show that the Austro-Hungarian Empire might consider giving Bosnia some autonomy. Serbians did not particularly want this more liberal view of Bosnia. Serbia was concerned that if Bosnia had some sort of autonomy within the Austro-Hungarian Empire, that Serbia's dreams of Greater Serbia would go away. Serbia had been the home of several anarchist groups, and the man who did assassinate the Archduke and his wife, Gavrilo Princip, was a member of the anarchist group the Black Hand. Gavrilo Princip was actually caught fairly quickly after he shot the Archduke. Unfortunately, the Archduke would not survive. And this assassination would be the spark that set off the powder keg that ended up starting the Great War. The Great War begins. The Great War began when the alliance system kicked in. Franz Ferdinand was actually assassinated at the end of June of 1914. Between June and the end of July, there was a lot of behind the scenes going on. Austria-Hungary wanted to punish Serbia for the attack and death of the Archduke. Austria-Hungary blamed Serbia since the Black Hand and Principe came from Serbia. Austria-Hungary wanted to be sure that it would not be alone if the Russians decided to move in and protect the Serbians, because remember, Russia is Serbia's protector. So Austria-Hungary consulted with Germany, and the Germans assured Austria-Hungary that they would back Austria-Hungary in anything that she decided to do about the assassination of the Archduke. The Germans also attempted to make sure that Russia would stay out of any sort of punishment type of conflict that might arise between Austria-Hungary and Serbia. However, the Russians had no intention of sitting on the sidelines, especially if Germany became involved. So Russia told Germany and told Austria-Hungary that if Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia, then Russia would still feel obligated to come and protect Serbia. So what occurs is Austria-Hungary, feeling supported by Germany and hoping to keep this a small, localized punishment type of situation, declared war on Serbia on July 28th. Upon hearing this, Russia began to mobilize. The Germans asked Russia to stop mobilizing. Russia basically replied that they would not do that. So Germany declared war on Russia on August 1st. That means the big question would be, would France and especially Britain back up Russia? Germany declared war on France on August 3rd and asked Britain if Britain would stand neutral or join against Germany. Britain said it would act as it saw fit, which was pretty much a non-answer. Germany declaring war on France asked for passage through Belgium. Belgium said, no, you can't just march through our country. Germany invaded Belgium on August 4th. The German invasion of Belgium is what brought Britain into the war because Britain was Belgium's protector. So Britain declared war on Germany on August 4th. And then Austria-Hungary declared war on Russia on August 6th. Not to be left out, France and Britain will declare war on Austria-Hungary on August 12th, and thus the world is at war. The political cartoon seen here, you have Serbia to the left as being the little guy, Austria-Hungary right next to it in the punishing mode, Russia striding up to protect Serbia. If you hit that little fellow, I'll. Germany coming in to protect Austria-Hungary, saying, if you strike my friend, I'll. France running up to catch up. If you hit him, I'll. And Britain dashing up at the end. Here's a political cartoon called The Crime of the Ages. Who did it? Take a minute and look, study the cartoon. From whose point of view is this cartoon? And what is the cartoon saying? You might notice the hand in the left is pointing at the piece of Europe which has a stake through its heart. Since the hand is coming across the water, you could assume that this political cartoon comes from an American newspaper and might be condemning Europe going to war. If you notice the characters in the cartoon, on the right, Italy standing with its hands crossed. Clockwise, France pointing to Germany, Belgium pointing to Germany, England pointing to Germany, Russia pointing to Germany. Germany points at Russia, Austria-Hungary points at Serbia, and Serbia points at Austria-Hungary. Remember this cartoon. We will come back to the questions it raised. So at the beginning of the war, you have the Allied powers versus the Central powers. You'll notice the US is not involved yet. The German war plan was known as the von Schlieffen Plan. The idea was to attack France through Belgium, hopefully quickly defeat France. It helps if you know that the Franco-Prussian War, the Germans had defeated the French in a very few weeks. So the Germans hoped to repeat this and then be able to swing their troops around to go and oppose the Russians, who were usually slow to mobilize. Unfortunately for Germany's war plan, they will not defeat the French quickly, and the Russians will be much quicker to mobilize than anybody expected. Since Germany marched through Belgium and attacked neutral Belgium, there was a lot of propaganda that talked about all the atrocities of the German soldiers in Belgium. After the war, it was discovered that a lot of the newspaper reports were propaganda made up. But this was known as the crime against Belgium, and it raised a lot of dislike of Germany in Britain and even in the US. Based on experiences in the 1800s, where the wars in Europe had been relatively quick and contained, a lot of the countries went to war thinking that they would be home by Christmas, that this would be a short war. They might have looked to the American Civil War as an example of what could happen. It was not going to be a short war, and no one was going to be home by Christmas. Recruitment posters. The first on the left is a recruitment poster from Britain, which is, of course, where we got the idea for the I Want You, Uncle Sam poster. Recruits came from across the British Isles, Australia, and they came from across the Central Powers, the Austro-Hungarians, the German soldiers. It's interesting to note that all people on all the sides look the same when they're saying goodbye to their loved ones. French recruits, and the desire to be a soldier starts young. Millions of soldiers mobilized. Women play a part in the war effort. In fact, it'll be the women's work in the war effort in both Britain and the United States that will earn women the right to vote after the war is over. Liberty loans are British. If you see Liberty bonds, that's American. So you were encouraged to buy Liberty loans or Liberty bonds to help support and finance the war. Women were used in recruitment posters. They served as munitions workers, both for the Allies and for the Central Powers. The Young Women's Christian Association in Britain, these women were known as the land girls, and they helped plant and harvest food in the British Isles. Women as ambulance drivers, Red Cross nurses, and women in the Queen Mary's Army Auxiliary served as clerks, secretaries, drivers, both in Britain and on the continent, to help free up men for fighting. In Russia, women fought. And of course, you had spies, such as Mata Hari, who was a spy for Germany who lived in France. She became very famous. Propaganda is big in any war, and this one's no exception. Notice how Germany will be portrayed in many of these posters. From Australia, America. Notice the bat says culture. Culture's dead, according to this poster. Another American poster beating back the Hun, as the Germans got called. Take care of your children. Serbia has the little hat on. The Western Front was a war of attrition. This is the war of the trenches. Some of the major battles, the Somme, the Marne. You can see on this map, the Western Front over in France stretches from Belgium all the way down. The Eastern Front over near Russia. You have a Middle Eastern Front, if you look down near the Ottoman Empire, where you see Gallipoli. And there was a Balkan Front as well in Serbia. Along the Western Front, you had rows and rows of trenches. You can see the armistice line is the red line. That's the line that peace was called at. The furthest German advance was ended 20 miles from Paris. At the Battle of the First Marne, French and British soldiers were actually taken up to the front in the Paris taxicabs. All the Paris taxicabs got together and they went back and forth, carrying troops to get them up to the battle line as quickly as possible. After the Marne, the first Marne, because there's a second Marne, the first Marne, the battles along the Western Front dissolved into essentially trench warfare. A picture of the trenches, you can see that there were even barracks within the trenches. You had your forward trenches. A sapper was one who put up lines of communication between the forward and the rear trenches. The area between the two trenches was known as no man's land. Basically, the trench lines moved backwards and forwards over about a 200-mile wide area. They'd just go back and forth and back and forth. And they stretched, as I said, from Belgium down towards the German border. There would be attempts to tunnel under the trenches so you could blow up the other guy's trench. Sometimes successful, sometimes not. And you had cross sections of the trenches. You could see where the trench goes down into the barracks area. You had to be very, very careful of putting your head up over the trench. It was an easy way to get your face blown off. And the trenches were packed with men. When it rained, the trenches filled with water and your feet were never dry. Lice were ever present, as were rats. Again, being very careful not to put his head up too high. And you can see in no man's land, there's not a lot of vegetation left. A major offensive at Verdun had over 500,000 casualties per side. The Somme was one of the worst battles of the entire war. It lasted 5 months. Huge loss of life. The gentleman in the bottom right picture has a mask. If you were caught a shell or shrapnel and part of your face was destroyed, one of the things that came about as a result of this war at first was a mask which they would paint to as close to a skin color as you could get. But also what will eventually come out of the war is plastic surgery to repair the faces of as many men as they possibly could. Those who lived lost arms and legs, or sometimes simply suffered from what was then called shell shock, what we would call PTSD. And this is Big Bertha, which brings us the War of the Industrial Revolution. Big Bertha was the huge German gun that could shell somebody 20 miles away. The French and the British came up with tanks, although their design left need for improvement. The German U-boats were greatly feared. The number of Allied ships sunk by the German U-boats was substantial. In fact, it will be this unrestricted submarine warfare, or sinking of Allied and neutral ships, essentially, by Germans that pulls the U.S. into the war. Airplanes enter this war, and you had the aces from each country. Manfred von Richthofen, known as the Red Baron, was the top German ace. Eddie Rickenbacker of the Hat in the Ring Squadron was the top U.S. ace. The U.S. built many, many planes. The Germans also used the Zeppelin. They conducted bombing raids on London and along the southern coast of England during this war by the Zeppelins. New inventions also include flamethrowers, grenade launchers, poison gas, and a much more efficient machine gun. The French were the first to use poison gas. The Germans will jump on the bandwagon. Both sides also develop gas masks, and not just for people, but for the dogs and for horses. More about tanks. And U-boats. And just in case you ever wanted to know how you took a shower on a U-boat. The art of the war is going to tend to focus, besides propaganda, which is a different subject, but the art of the war will focus more on what the people went through and the effects. Here are some troops just hanging out. You can tell this is a Scottish regiment because the fellows are in kilts. A view of trench warfare. And the idea that those who fight are really just cogs in a machine that will take their lives. Those who have been gassed and wounded. The ironically named Paths of Glory. And by the end of the war, the Germans were getting desperate for soldiers, so the cartoon is indicating that the German army would take anybody into their ranks.